Hey, and welcome to Things Worth Learning. I am your host, Matt Stauffer, and this is a show where a curious computer programmer, that's me, interviews fascinating people about their passions. My guest today is Rissa Jackson, apprentice programmer at Titan. Rissa, would you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself, whether it's your personal or your professional life?
Sure. So my name is Rissa Jackson. I'm an apprentice programmer, as you said, and I spent some time teaching English in China in a previous chapter and then found programming. And my greatest love right now is acro as a movement. And I've been doing that for about 8 years, teaching for around 7 years. And I was part of I started a nonprofit for it. I was president for 2.5 years and vice president for about 2 years. And even though I'm always finding hobbies to fall in love with, that one's definitely captured my heart. And it really taught me that my body is capable of so much more than I thought. And often it was my mind getting in my way more than my body was.
Two notes about that. The second one is shorter. My friend just got back from like a leadership retreat with this former Marine. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, we spent the whole time basically with the Marine being like, it's not your body that's keeping you from being able to run these miles or whatever. It's your mind. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny because usually you hear that from much more of like a tough it out perspective. So hearing it from someone who I know is like as empathetic and caring as you is also really cool, kind of hearing the other side of it. The other thing is, I know that at least some of the people here probably don't know what acro is. I do because my sister's super into it. But could you tell us like a little bit about what acro is?
Yeah, I would love to. So acro is often called acro yoga. I avoid that term because although you could do it with a lot of yoga influences, I personally don't. But it's generally considered to be two people or more who are doing acrobatics together. And so a good way to think about it is if you've ever seen a trapeze artist, like their apparatus is that bar that they're swinging from, whereas my apparatus is another human.
Yeah, who's often laying on the ground beneath you with arms up or legs up or whatever.
Yeah, they can be on the ground, standing, but yeah.
Yeah, and for anybody who hasn't seen it before, I think the simplest introduction for me when I tell people about it is imagine if you laid in the ground and put your arms and legs up and like took a little kid and flew them around as like an airplane, except that other kid was like was actually an adult and they were doing like circus type moves. They're circus acrobatics types of moves. Like that's like the intro and they're like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand that. So, but like it looks really, and people are like doing flips and spins and it looks so smooth. It's like, I remember growing up, I didn't understand how difficult certain types of dance were. Like I'd watch ballet and be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
And then I, was with someone who was a dancer who was just kind of like, hold this move that smoothly and I was like, oh my God, that's terrifyingly. So sometimes acro can be deceptively easy looking because you're like, oh, they're just smooth. But that's the work has been put in to make. So anyway, anybody who wants to, you can go Google it. And you know what? Could we put links in the show notes to some of your videos?
Yeah, definitely.
Would that be okay?
Yeah. I'll send
All right,
you some
cool.
videos.
So check the show notes. We'll have some. All right, cool. So before we get to the actual topic of the episode for today, do you have any, our first question always is, do you have any sort of life mantra or phrase or idea you try to live your life by?
Oh, yeah. I was really thinking a lot about this when we were, planning this. And I ended up picking, I might regret this later, but I'm doing it anyways. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And I feel like in honor of that phrase, that's partially why I picked it. But before I explain what that phrase means to me, I'd really love to know what you think of that phrase.
Okay. Anything, you put me on the spot here. I like that.
I have, yeah.
I have a personal response that is very similar to like the, forget what it is, but something like shipped is better than perfect or something like that. It's just the idea that like we try to get things perfect before we allow ourselves to actually like put it out in the world or try and do the thing. And so when I hear you say that, the bias I read into it maybe is like, just do the damn thing. Like, don't worry about getting perfect. Just do it. So that's how I respond.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing in it. Like, okay, cool. As a recovering perfectionist, like for me, this phrase has been really freeing. Like this concept of like permission to just do things badly. And you maybe try not to end it badly. Like you look for growth and improvement in a healthy way. But like, just that ability to be like, it's okay to do it badly because I want to do this.
I love that. I love that. I have a very uncomfortable relationship with trying to make my body do certain things, especially when it comes to like dance and elegant stuff. And people always laugh. They're like, you're a bass player. You have rhythm. I was like, yeah, but it only stays in my fingers. It can't translate to the rest of my body. And it was only in the last 5 years where I just started saying, I'm going to dance anyway, right? Like I know that I'm not a good dancer. I'm just going to do it. And it's been embarrassing at times, but it's been wonderful. So I very much appreciate that. I love that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can take it beyond the beginning stage. We can have that permission to do something badly forever. Like we can just enjoy it and not be good at it. And, it's nice to not always have to have everything we do and produce be held to a certain level.
That's great. Meaning I can dance for the rest of my life, even if I never get any better, and I can just enjoy it. And I like that. That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for this therapy session. I feel like this podcast is bit by bit becoming like, I just finished the one with Bissarat and it was like therapy the whole time. So anyway, thank you for the beginning of my therapy session here. Speaking of my therapy session, I already know what we're going to be talking about. I know it's going to be a therapy session. This podcast is about one topic you're really passionate about. Can you tell me what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully the mantra ties in clearly to this topic, but if it doesn't, let me know and I'll try to clarify the connection that I see.
Sure.
But basically, the concept the topic that I want to cover is how we have all these stories that we tell ourselves, we tell other people, these identities that we connect with, and we just feel so confidently that they are static, like they are clearly the way they are and not changing. And I want to challenge everyone, including myself, to think about how can we change them and how can we realize that they are stories, that we've written them and that we can rewrite them.
Therapy. I actually will relate that to my therapy and ask you some questions there. So I recently had some big life changes, and a lot of my therapy lately has been trying to, like, my therapist this morning literally said, you're going through a second adolescence. And she's basically saying, like, you are figuring out, again, the things that have been defined and static for you for the last 15 years of your life, and now you're in this kind of different life phase. And for me, it has to do with a change in relationship, but also a change in relationship to religion and other things. And so it's a lot of like, oh, I'm going to be the one who's defining what I'm about instead of accepting other people's prescriptions. And so for me, the first thing I heard when you said that was not even necessarily my own narratives, but it was the narratives of other people that I internalized. So I think my first question for you would be, of the narratives that we consider static, where do you think they tend to come from?
Oh, there's so many places. But I like that you highlighted that some of them come from outside us, because I think a lot do. There's stereotypes that we internalize. And this relates to, me not thinking I could be a software developer. I had all these internalized ideas of what a software developer was like, and that was not me. And, they also can be just things our parents unintentionally or intentionally give to us, and we hold on to them longer than we should. And they can come from media. They just come from everywhere. But I'm sure also some of them come internally from us as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna. I promise I won't make this a therapy session, but I just could give like so many examples of the things I'm actively working on right now, where I have a story of I am this or I'm not this. I do this or I do not do this. This is acceptable. Like one of my therapist's constant phrases to me is like, I know you want to be a good guy, but that's like your driving force in the world. But like, where are your definitions of what a good guy is coming from? And how can you allow yourself to be someone doing something that defining rather than everybody else? So there's these various aspects of the stories. The stories aren't even just that I'm a good guy. The stories are also like, what does being a good guy look like? And how do I get to be the one defining that? So it's really complicated. It's really nuanced and robust. What if you were wanting to like help somebody understand this concept? What would be like an example or a story that you could give for us to kind of just say, here's what a static kind of like internalized concept could look like, and here's what it looks like to realize it's actually not that static? Yeah,
definitely. I can give a story. I'd also like to mention that I've been thinking about this for a long time and just kind of playing with it and like figuring it out, kind of like it's revealing itself to me as I learn more about it. And I feel like I'm kind of almost finding a framework of it. So I'd love to go through some of the stages.
Please, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But let's start with like a really simple story. I think you gave a great example. You said you can't dance. You can dance, Matt.
Yeah. I can dance, and I have been proving that by going out and dancing.
Yeah, you've been proving that.
But yeah, so the original narrative was I can't dance, and then the later narrative was I can't dance well, and then that even prompts the question of what does dancing well look like?
100%.
Right? Because is dancing well enjoying yourself, or is dancing well performing particular moves? Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it for sure. And my static perception was definitely just that I can't. And I was like, I had a good sense of humor about it. I'm like, look, I can't dance, but that's okay. I'm white, like white guys can't dance. That's okay. No big deal. Right. But I'm not at the point yet, I think, where I can just walk into a situation and go, what I'm doing is dancing well, right? Like, cause it can dance means you're doing it good enough according to some standards, right? I have not internalized a set of standards that allows me to do that yet. So right now I'm just saying, I know in my head that this is something I should feel free to do, so I'm going to do it. But I'm still embarrassed when I'm doing it, So
yeah.
I don't know where that fits in your framework, but I'm definitely not to the end of the framework yet, for sure.
I don't think there is an end. And I think it's just kind of like realizing, things along the way of like, is being what we consider good at dancing important to you? Like we can get to that later. But are you enjoying it? Are you happy with what you're doing? Like if you are, then like you are dancing, and there doesn't need to be any further levels to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, Titan, the company that Rissa works at, is the company that I co-run. And that means that I was a part of Rissa's hiring process. And one of the things that she did exceptionally was, in an interview process, in an abnormal way, turn around and ask questions to us. And it was very much just kind of like, wait a minute, I'm interviewing you and you're asking me all these really deep questions. And I remember Dan and I especially were kind of just taken aback when I was like, oh, that's really deep. I'm going to have to think that for... And so I'm very not surprised that you're already immediately turning this interview around on me. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm giving the examples here. So anyway, I see what you're doing here. But yeah, okay. So is there more of my story that you want me to be telling, or do you want to move on to your framework?
We can start talking about the framework, and if we end up turning it around on you more later, we can. It's
fine. It's your, this is you run this podcast today, so it's whatever you want.
Exciting. So I was trying to think more about how I could communicate this, and like stages were coming up for me. And of course I'm starting with stage 0 because I'm a developer.
Yeah.
Obviously.
0 index to raise.
Yeah. So I think 0 is the stories. And we already had a great example from you. They can be, I'm not athletic, I'm not graceful, I can't dance, I can't draw, I'm not good at math, like anything like that. And then once we get out of that stage, we learn that we have so much more agency of making changes to these stories. And so stage 1 is understanding that agency, and that these are all just skills. Like, they are not magic. Right. You are not an artist or not an artist. You can learn. And so some skills that I wanted to highlight are, empathy. Michelle Hansen was with you talking about that as a skill.
Yeah,
and I just really...
First thing I just thought of when you said that.
I just really love considering that a skill, because I think a lot of us are just like, oh, I'm not an empathetic human. You can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Organization, public speaking, creating art, hosting a podcast, like all of these are skills that maybe you are more natural at them, but you 100% can get good at them. Yeah.
I love that. So for me, the first one is I've always kind of like, I often had a perception that some people just had the connection in their body that made them a dancer, and some people didn't. And certainly that's true to a degree, right? Some people came by it more naturally by birth. Some people often, I think, came by it more naturally because of the environment they were in. If your whole family dances all the time, and you're a baby dancing, you're a toddler dancing, then when you come to high school or middle school and you want to dance, and that wasn't me, right? So there is an element where, in choosing to be a dancer today versus somebody else, I certainly am at a disadvantage. But I was like, but that does not mean that people who are professional dancers didn't take whatever they started from and go to another place through practice and effort. So I got you. My phase 1, I can learn to dance. And I did go to 6 weeks of a hip hop dance class 10 years ago.
Amazing.
So I was the only guy there, and it was very awkward, but I did it, and I felt more comfortable with dancing afterwards than I did beforehand. So phase 1.
Definitely. And, as you pointed out, like you are not necessarily, if you learn these things as an adult, you are not necessarily going to be better than someone who's been doing it their whole life. But
Right.
I think one important aspect of all this is not focusing on how your skill compares to others' skill, but how your skill compares to your past self skill.
I love that. That's awesome. Am I improving?
Yeah. You can't do anything about not starting earlier. Like that is over. There's no longer anything we can do about that. But you can do something about starting now or tomorrow.
Yeah. I like that. And you get all those memes about how old, Oprah was when she started her company or whatever. And you're like, yes, okay, right, cool. That doesn't just apply to your life calling. It can also apply to dancing or whatever other thing.
That,
Math.
childhood skill that you wanted to do, you can do it.
Yeah. So you're saying I should pick up skateboarding tomorrow? Is that my next one?
Is it calling to you? Is that a thing you want to do?
I mean, it was the first thing that popped in my head when you said that. So every time I see a skateboarding video, I go, I kind of wish that I had skateboarded as a kid. So maybe that's going to be my next one.
It's not too late. You should write that down.
I don't need to write it down. I remember it because I think of it every time I see a skateboarder. So.
And I also, part of stage one, I want to highlight that words matter. Like the way we say things really helps us think that way. So when we say things, and I'm guilty of this as well, but when we say things like I can't dance, it really emphasizes in our brain that is what we can't do. And so maybe you could say, I'm learning to dance, just something that opens it up to more possibilities. Or I can't play guitar yet. I can't skateboard yet for you.
Yeah. I love that. And because it's interesting because there's this whole The Secret, speaking of Oprah, The Secret and all those manifest or whatever, where a lot of people are like, you just name it and claim it. It's just going to happen, which is bunk. But the idea that our words can impact our own reality is, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Like it can change your perspective or whatever. And so especially as a parent, I can look at my kids and if he says I can't do this, my son says I can't do this, I'm like, nah, that's not true. So I understand it for him. So that makes a lot of sense. You are choosing to speak in a way that reflects a positive and hopeful reality more than the negative decisions you've made. That static story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
It's often easier to recognize that in other people. So, you can make that a thing where, people just mention to you like, oh, you said I can't do this thing. Or, you say it to them. It can be an uplifting thing. Not like I got you messed up, but, just kind of like, hey, we're all trying to be more positive and, just not cut off options from our life. Like we're not saying we can't do this thing. We're saying we can't currently do this thing.
Yes. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So you were talking about how skateboarding is popping up for you, a little bit, every time you see something that reminds you of it. And so I feel like that takes us very naturally to stage 2, which is priorities. I like to think of this as a pretty introspective stage where we're just noticing, maybe skateboarding just keeps popping up and you're like, okay, maybe I need to look into this thing, make some time into my life for it, because obviously there's some part of me that wants that thing. And, it could be anything, but just giving yourself some introspection to let those things pop up and figure out what they are.
Yeah. So I'm curious because the introspection for you is coming after the first ones. And so what you're really saying is, prior to the introspection, you're really changing your overall perspective on, because if stage 1 was just changing my narrative on a specific thing, then I would probably want to introspect beforehand, right? I would want to say, what are the things I want to think about? And then how can I change my narrative about them? Am I reading right that in your perspective, you want to kind of get rid of that language blanket before you introspect and figure out where you're going to put your time and energy?
Ooh, yes. I love this question. I think we can be introspective on stage 1 as well. But I do think that, even if you never plan on changing, I'm trying to think of something. I can't play guitar currently. I don't think that it will ever be a priority for me to learn how to play guitar. However, I would like to live my life with my story being I can't currently play it, not I can't play it. And so that is just, we can have introspection about what that list of things, of stories we've created for ourselves is, but letting them go is great.
Yeah, phase one is a little bit about like identifying and removing the negative static stories. And then phase two is now picking what you're going to kind of spend your time and energy on going forward.
Yes.
100%. Or no, was that one? I don't know if I got the numbers right, but yes. Okay, cool. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And stage 3 goes along with stage 2 quite a bit.
Okay.
And that's also like looking at maybe some of those stories you have and just eliminating them as priorities for you. I think there's something beautiful about the fact that we have limited time, in that it just helps bring into sharper focus what you want and what you want to focus your time on. So one that happens to be for me is I have no interest in running a marathon. I 100% believe I could if I put the time and energy into it. I think it's wonderful how great it can be for other people, but it is not my priority. And so I already removed from my language that I can't run a marathon, but I'm also removing from my, pseudo to-do list that I'm going to try to run a marathon.
That's cool. Yeah, and I could say, you know what, my current level of dancing ability is enough, and all I want to do is change my attitude towards it, and then I can be fine, and that still will change my dancing life for the rest of my life, even if I don't spend any more energy in getting better at it. So I hear you. I like that.
100%. Yeah. I think there's something nice about like letting go of things, especially if they're things you feel guilty about. Because, there are things that come up for you and you think you're supposed to want them, or other people, like you feel like you should be better at them.
Yeah.
But maybe with this step you've learned, like, I don't actually have to feel any guilt about this. This is not something I want in my life.
Yep. All right. So where do we go from there?
Yeah.
Now that we've kind of decided the things we're going to work on.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of introspection, but now we're on stage 4, which is doing the work. Like, we have identified things that are a priority for us. Hopefully we have maybe a list of them. And so now we start actually implementing, the work to get to those priorities, to those new stories that we're looking for. And so I have like random advice that I'm going to run through.
Love it.
If you have advice as well, feel free to say it.
Cool.
So if you've decided, let's say you want to learn how to dance, don't remake the wheel. Like, there are so many people who have advice on how to get there, how to be better at it. Learn from other people who came before you. And don't try to do it all at once. Like, you can set goals and you can try to do something by a certain time that can be really great for our brain, but you are not going to go from a off-tempo dancer to a advanced, professional dancer in a month. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
So, maybe bring it into your life in baby steps, like you take a class once a week. And really, you should embrace being bad at it. Like, make it fun if you can.
I'm good at that one. It's so funny because for this particular example, sorry to interrupt, but like with both the last one you just said and this one, dancing with my kids around the house gives me both the time to have it and the embrace being bad, because like a daddy dance means a crappy dance, and we just all laugh at it and it's very funny and they all make fun of my dancing, but it's a moment where I am working with my body, even though if I'm not doing like cool looking things. So anyway, as an example, but sorry, keep going with your advice.
Yeah, and I like the concept of the dad dance, because then that can like make it safe for you to like be vulnerable and dance around people, because you're like, I'm a dad, I'm embracing the badness of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So definitely, embrace that, bringing back the mantra from the beginning, like, do it poorly if it's important to you. And I think one thing that we all kind of struggle with is if we try to do something and we keep it up for a certain amount of time and then we fall off the wagon. Let's say we're journaling and we journal for 1 month and then we stop. We really focus on like, well, I can't journal. I've done it for a month and I fell off the wagon. And we assume that that is reflective of how our future experiences will be with it. But it's not. It can be a completely different experience. And I also feel like even with that month, like, you could look at the positive of it. Like, you journaled for a whole month. Like, great job.
Yeah. Good on you. Like, yeah, I love that. And it's continuing the same idea of taking the stories that we receive and tell to ourselves sometimes and choosing to reshape them. And I love that. Like, and you use the word agency. Agency is one of my favorite words in all my therapy. I'm like, agency and freedom are like what I talk about all the time. And I love the idea of you get to make the decisions of how you're going to interpret those things. And you can choose positive and hopeful things rather than choosing negative and critical things.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there are multiple ways to look at things. If you're going to pick the way, you might as well pick the positive way.
Love it. That's awesome.
This is a little bit similar but different from something I heard from my own therapist that I've been really loving. So, let's say if I need to reschedule something with someone and I think it's going to make them feel stressed or like I'm not reliable or something, I don't know what they're going to feel. And I'm currently picking for them what they're going to feel.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to pick it anyways, I might as well pick positive things. Like maybe they were feeling stressed about doing it and they're excited to have the break and excited to have it rescheduled.
Suddenly got an hour of their day back and you gave them that gift and you didn't realize it was going to be a gift. That's cool.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how often we make decisions for other people, not even just by like our stress level, but sometimes we don't even allow them to do it because we've already picked for them how they're going to respond. They're like, oh, well, they wouldn't XYZ, so I'm not even going to offer it to them. And like the opportunities we miss out on by not just allowing people to respond the way they're going to and instead deciding for them because of our anxieties or whatever is pretty significant.
Yeah. And it's a thing I am still working on, but I like when I notice it so that I can try to make a different choice.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So let's see. One thing that I find really easy to see in my physical practices, I talked about how often my brain is in the way more than my body with acro as a physical practice. It is so obvious that progress is not linear. One day you try something and you can do 5 out of 5 times perfectly. And the next day you can't do it at all. And then the next day you do 3 out of 5 and, it just kind of goes up and down and it's very clear, but that happens with everything. As a developer, one day you're like learning a lot and then the next day it's all there. You remember it all and you're just like, wow, I'm great. I've learned so much. The next day it's all gone. You're just like, where did it go? And I feel like it can just feel like, oh, I've gotten worse. But when you zoom out on progress, as long as you keep at it, it is, going upwards. It's got an upward trajectory. And like a way that I like to look at it is it's not linear, but chronologically it is.
Right. Yeah. And it's, if you imagine like a lot of times when you're doing any kind of statistics, you have to look at like the length and the frequency of the sample in order to really kind of like a good thing. Because, people can manipulate statistics very easily by changing the X and the Y. But they also can do it just by zooming on certain things because you can show this small, like, oh, it's an uptick or it's a downtick or whatever here. But if you zoom out, you get a completely different shape of the graph. And so if you imagine you could like chart your growth as an acro person over 2 years, you would see that linear or whatever line, but if you zoom into a certain month, that month might look a lot shakier. So that's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you're having a bad day, try if you can, and remember that does not mean anything about your overall skill level or your progress. It's just an off day, and it'll keep going upwards.
I love it. That's awesome.
And then one thing that I find incredibly important as a recovering perfectionist is break streaks on purpose. I think streaks I think they have value, but the problem for me with streaks is if you get sucked into not breaking the streak and then once it's broken, you lose all motivation, then that is not...
It didn't help. And that is not sustainable because there are very few things in life that you could keep a streak on and do it every single day. And so if you want longevity with anything, you cannot have a streak. You have to have days where you don't do it and then you get back on the wagon. Wow. It's interesting because I know that a lot of gamification, with workout apps and with Duolingo and stuff like that, have discovered that focusing on streaks help us. But also a lot of the longer proven things involve breaks once a week. You've got a cheat day or a rest day or a whatever. And I never even thought about the fact that if you work out 5 days a week and take 2 days off, versus having to fill your Apple Watch circle for every single day for the entire whatever. It's a very different perspective, because in one of them you reset to 1 or to 0 at the beginning of every week. In another one, you never want to reset to 0 ever again, and the pressure builds the longer it's gone. So that's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, and I will say that I still get sad when I lose streaks, but what I've really tried to do is be purposeful about doing it occasionally. Like, I am actually not going to get, my Fitbit hours of, activity for the day, so that I don't feel devastated on a day when I'm busy and I can't do it. And it's just, it has to fall off the list.
That's cool. I like that idea.
Yeah. So that one feels very important to me, and, it can be embraced in whatever way feels good for you, but at least consider it, especially if you're a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And then just know that there are probably going to be plateaus at points. And so if you get stuck into this next trick mindset, and that concept really comes from acro. Like, in acro, we learn a skill, a trick, and there are people, you'll recognize them, who are just they need the next trick, and they need the next trick, and they need the next trick, and they aren't going to work on making it better and cleaner, and they get devastated if they're not constantly working and achieving the next thing.
It's like shiny object syndrome, but for acro. Yeah.
100%.
So is the opposite side of that to be okay? So, because can you tell me about how that next trick syndrome compared to the concept of plateaus? How do those relate to each other?
Well, so if you keep following that, you're probably going to just hit plateaus, and you might skip some of them by just trying to refocus onto something else. But inevitably they're going to show up, and maybe you even plateau on just looking for new tricks. I don't know. But
right. Yeah.
Finding a way to be more comfortable with that discomfort of not feeling progress can be really helpful for longevity. And I think for me, a huge thing is, how can we make things sustainable and have longevity with them for these things that we want to add to our life?
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. So one thing that I've really enjoyed learning about is, so obviously affirmations is a concept that a lot of people are familiar with, but from Hal Elrod's Miracle Morning, I learned of them in a new way that I really enjoyed. His concept of affirmations is that they're pretty goal-oriented, and they're supposed to be achievable goals. You're not just saying my affirmation is I'm wealthy, or, whatever, something that feels untrue, because then when you're saying it, it won't
and you're not actually wealthy in that moment. Yeah.
So maybe a way to change that wealthy one would be, I will achieve financial stability or freedom.
Okay.
And then you kind of say why, and you're saying how. And so why is because I deserve to feel safe and secure and not worry about money. And how is I'm putting in the work to achieve financial stability. Maybe you're reading books. Maybe you're learning about how to do it. Maybe you're finding a job that's going to allow you to get there, whatever it is. But I find that really helpful to just be I will achieve this thing because I'm doing the work to get there.
I like that. It reminds me of, everyone talks about New Year's resolutions, and I realized that one of the reasons I didn't like them is because most people don't actually set resolutions, they set goals. And a goal is, I'm going to do this particular thing by this particular date, and a resolution is, I resolve to just do something. And so for me, a resolution is a lot easier if I resolve to work out a number of times a week, or read a certain number of books about financial stability, or do X amount of hours a week towards a particular side hustle that eventually allow me, versus my goal being to reach financial stability. Because setting up a New Year's resolution that's really just a goal that you may or may not get, I think it's one of the reasons why people burn out of them a lot, is because what are the steps from here to there? But instead, if you pick a step and resolve to do that step, which sounds kind of similar to what you're talking about, then you can say, all right, this is what I'm going to do today towards those goals. So you can have goals, but steps or resolutions or affirmations, whatever, that are getting you in that direction, I feel are much more manageable, doable, controllable, and less overwhelming if you miss it for a day, because you can miss a day of reading the books without feeling versus the idea of what does it even mean to miss a day of becoming financially unstable. Like, who the hell knows, So
yeah, definitely. I also think one thing that you're really highlighting is like how to take something that's like more just like a concept, like, it just feels amorphous, and then you're just making it more concrete, like something we can work towards in a way that makes sense to our brains and isn't just like, I don't know, I would like to not worry about money. Like, that's a big concept.
Yeah. It's a good concept to have, but then you have to break it down into things you can do, right? So there's nothing wrong with not wanting to worry about money. How are you going to get there?
Yeah, definitely.
I like that.
And I did this for getting a job at Titan. I had affirmations about getting a job at Titan.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
Are you going to share them?
I mean, it's just like, I will get a job at Titan because I deserve a job that feels supportive and it makes me feel good to work at. And I will get this job because I'm putting in all the work I can to get it. And, for me, it's not that like, if I don't get the job, I've failed. It's just that like, from my perspective, like I am doing everything I can to achieve this goal that I would like.
And you did a lot. You worked very, very, very hard at getting the job. And while you were a great hire anyway, the fact that you put in so much effort certainly had an impact on our perception of you. So that affirmation put you in a direction to take steps that most people don't take when applying for a job. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as perfectionists, it can be like, it can feel dangerous to like want something that feels uncertain. And so I think being able to avoid focusing on that part, but focus on like, what can I do from my side? The things I have control over. Like that felt like a good way to work towards something. And then it's like, I did the best I can. Didn't work out.
I can't choose how people are going to respond to me, but I can choose what I'm going to put out there for them to respond to. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
I like that.
So that is most of the stuff I have for stage 4. Stage 5 is just kind of how like this never really ends. It's like cycles of reflection and refinement. Like one thing I was thinking about recently is maybe self-care needs its like own category. Maybe it already does have one, but maybe we're gonna consider tools that we can add to our tool belt of, like meditation is a tool we can add to our tool belt, or going to therapy. Like those are things that we want to prioritize in our life. And I think that another thing that's come up for me recently is I think there are different periods of time we're in. There's moments where we have the openness to add skills to our life, but then there are other times where we need to like start cutting back or just maintain. Yeah. And one example of that for me was not too long ago, you were telling me about how you were really having a hard time sleeping at night. And so your priority was your sleep. And so you had to cut out some of those other things that are good for you, but they weren't your priority at that moment, like working out or any of those other things. And so I totally believe that that's super valid. Like it's okay to break those streaks and pull back on those other things and just be like, the number one priority is sleep. Yeah. And then the rest of it can get added in when we have the time.
Yeah. And in that particular circumstance, it's very helpful having both trainers and therapists and psychiatrists being like, hey, all these other things that you're working on, sleep impacts all of them. So when I heard that from so many different angles, and I'd be like, well, I'm going to miss some sleep so I can get this workout in. I'm going to miss some sleep so I can cook healthier meals. I'm going to miss some sleep so I can whatever. And then these people are saying all those things depend on your sleep. I was like, oh, okay. So it is, sometimes it's also just about prioritization. Like I need to set up the like what are my big rocks that must happen, and then I can start re-adding things back in. And also, when you were giving the example earlier, or where you're talking about just how we have these seasons, I mean, like many of the times that you've been saying things, parenting has come up in my mind because, for example, times where you can't choose as many things is, it's certainly, especially parents of young kids, but also like I remember before I had kids, talking to a guy in my co-working space, and he was like, yeah, I get one night a week to do whatever I want, and I decided I'm going to pick up a hobby because I haven't had any hobbies for the last 8 years, and I think I'm going to learn drums. Can you help me like figure out what drum kit to get? And I just remember thinking, 1 day a week, one hobby? And then I spent years with no days a week and no hobbies because I was not being as responsible with my own time and energy as that guy was. And I was like, and I remembered him, I was like, I should be more like Andy with the 1 day a week with the one hobby. And so like, it was a helpful lesson in needing to do what you're saying, like carve out time, pick out which things on your list, like, and there's different periods of time. People keep saying like, hey, do you still play bass? And I'm like, well, I still consider myself a bassist, but it has not made its way back up to the top of the list yet, and maybe one day it will again. So I appreciate what you're saying here.
Yeah, definitely. Like, we do not have to add these things to our life and then keep them forever and then just be forever adding new things. Like, there's, a flow to all of it that you can like respond to. But I do think the thing that you said that is really key and I'd love to highlight is those core things, like those really important things, like identifying them and making sure that they're happening for you. And so like for you in that moment, sleep was that core thing. And
yeah,
maybe once that started getting better, then you can be like, okay, next thing is maybe healthy eating or something.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting to imagine that, like you could ever say, hey, exercise. Like the first time I heard a trainer say, I'd rather you skip your workout tonight and go to sleep and get 7 hours of sleep tonight, blew my mind, because I can't imagine a physical trainer saying, don't do the workout. And so I think that was what got me on the road towards actually being able to understand, what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think that's great that they cared about you and they were prioritizing your health over, like whatever their goals for you are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Is that for your stages? I just keep wanting to give you space to bring up more.
I appreciate that. So I feel like it kind of has like a stage N, still a programmer.
Okay. Yep.
So I also like keeping this whole concept of how can we look at things with a positive spin or a less negative spin is, I like to imagine like starting our life from the end and coming back to this present moment. Like we potentially could have decades with these new stories, these new like skills that we've added to our life. So maybe like right now, Matt, you've gone, however many decades without the ability to skateboard, but you could have several decades where you were an amazing skateboarder and you could be like, yeah, I've been skateboarding for 40 years and I'm amazing. And I just think that's really
I'm
neat.
that old guy skateboarding at the park. And yeah, I picked this up when I was 37. Yeah. I like that. That's cool.
And then people are going to be blown away and they're going to be like, how did you do it?
Well, let me listen. There used to be a thing called a podcast. Let me show you the podcast on my MP3 player.
Yeah, and
okay,
they're going to be
Grandpa.
like, they're going to be like, that's not compatible with our technology.
Yeah. I like it. I like this idea.
Yeah.
We'll point back to this moment in time.
Yeah. So I think that mostly covers the stages that I've considered. However, I do want to point out some of the things that I feel like are most important from all of this to me. The most important thing is that realizing we have so much more agency than we think we do. Like, if you want to get pretty good at anything, you can get pretty good at almost anything. I mean, there's different types of bodies, there are different things that happen that can get in the way, but it's still pretty incredible how much we are actually capable of. And once you've understood that, like, you can really think about, like, what do you want to do with all that power?
Yeah. Oof, with all that power.
Yeah.
I like that.
There's a lot of power we have, and it's good to, like, notice it. And then kind of the next thing that I really want to point out is that introspection is so important. Like, finding moments to have introspection, because 10 years can go by and you haven't thought about the things that you wanted to achieve, and so you're nowhere near closer to your goals than 10 years ago. One quote I heard that can be a little painful, I was like, ooh, that's a little hard to hear, but I thought was great, was staying busy is a form of laziness.
Oh no, don't tell me this.
I am right there with you, and the owl, you just shot me in the heart with that. Yeah.
So when you heard that, what was the first thing that you thought you wanted to change in response to that?
Just being like busy or being active in ways that I want, and being aware of like the choices I'm making when I do things. By being busy with this thing, I can't be busy with these other things. Is the thing that I'm focusing on getting me closer to my goals, or not.
Sort of like the conversation I had earlier with Scott about intentionality, right? Like it's not about not doing things. It's about doing the thing, choosing to do the things that are going to move you in the directions you want rather than falling into kind of whatever's in front of you, which especially happens to frequently be doom scrolling and stuff like that for me, which keeps you busy, right? You can sit there for half an hour, but like, it's so weird to me that I can doom scroll for half an hour and the next day say I didn't have any time for meditation yesterday. Like, that's not true. I just didn't prioritize my time intentionally enough.
Yeah. And I don't think that this means that everything we do needs to be productive and needs to be working towards something. I think like setting aside time to do nothing is just as important for us and can be part of intentionality. But just realizing that if we never create space to look at our life and be like, are we happy with where we're going? Are we happy with what we're doing? We won't have life giving us that opportunity most of the time. It's just going to keep going.
Yeah. That's really good. Especially as you look at like the next 40 years of your life. Like imagine that you spent the next 40 years of your life not being intentional with your time and then look back and thought about all the things you didn't do because you were too busy filling it with whatever crap was pressing on you at the moment. Whew. That's deep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hit you so hard with that, but
no, it's good. I'll tell you, this podcast is just my therapy. I didn't realize this was going to happen, but it's just turned into a giant math therapy session every week. So,
okay, it's been therapy for me too. I like listening to it.
Oh, I love it. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but I wanted to make sure, is there anything else you wanted to get to in terms of the notes you had prepared?
I think one thing that I hear a lot from people who talk to me about how they kind of sort of want to be a programmer, but they shouldn't do it or something is they worry about like, well, if they do it, you know, maybe it takes them 2 years or 4 years or something. And then they'll be whatever age, you know, whatever age that feels old to them. And I think like one thing that's helpful to think about is no matter what, you will be that age. Are you going to be that age?
Either way.
Yeah, it's coming either way. Are you going to be that age and doing something that you want to be doing?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I think that fits in with the intentionality, but just don't let those numbers stop you from doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the memes about, you know, X was Y years old when they started this thing, on the one hand, they're a little bit, you know, trite. On the other hand, things become, what's the word for them, where something's like played out. Things become that way because so many people saw value in them, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we often go like roll our eyes at the thing, but the reason you've rolling your eyes is because you've seen it so many times because so many people saw it and went, wow, that's what I needed to hear right now. So cliche. Cliches become cliches because so many people saw them and said, oh, this is true. And eventually we get tired of it. But those things are true and we need to hear those stories. I like that. I just love that idea, right? Like, I'm going to be 40 in 3 years, no matter what. What kind of life do I want at age 40? Rather than like, what things am I just keeping myself from because I'm about to be 40? So,
yeah.
Cool. Is there go ahead. Anything else you want to cover?
Yeah, I think that covers most of the things that I wanted to cover. Are there any things that you would love to clarify or ask questions about? Or
no, I think that was fantastic. But I would say, could you run us through the steps real quick? Just kind of like say, or stage 0, this, stage 1, this. I think that'd be a cool way to close it out and then move on to the next question.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we start with stage 0. This is just our stories that we've created. Stage 1 is knowing that we have agency and that we can change those identities and stories we've created. And don't forget, words matter. Yep. Stage 2 is the power of priorities, figuring out what we want to focus our time on. Stage 3 is power of what's not a priority, letting go of things that we don't want to spend our time on. Stage 4 is doing the work. And stage 5 is reflection, refinement, you know, going back to the beginning and starting over again. And kind of stage N is decades with a new story.
I love it. That's wonderful. Of course, I say this every episode. I could pick your brain about 20 different things, but since we're at time, I will leave it to the imaginations of the listeners. But in a second, after this next question, I will also ask how they can follow you. So if they have follow-up questions or they can learn more about these amazing thoughts you have, they can do so. But before we get to that, the last question is, what insight or support did you either receive or need when you were younger that you hope more people will give to others?
I like this question a lot. I would have loved to have more support to be bad at things, try new things, and be more aware of the possibilities out there that, that I could go from bad to good at something and it be almost anything. My dad was hard on himself, and very, very much on everyone else. And it was impossible to ever reach his expectations. And he's a large part of why I've struggled with being a perfectionist. And it's taken me a lot of time to learn how to decouple my sense of self from what I do. And so maybe other people have had a different experience and they feel like aware of all these possibilities. But if they don't, I'd love for them to have more support to know that they have so much more agency than they think they do.
I love that. And, as a dad, I'm a perfectionist and I'm very hard on myself. And I literally hear that from people almost on a weekly basis. You need to set lower standards for yourself and have lower expectations for yourself. And of course, I want to do that for my own health. But also what you just said very much reminds me that, like, it's not just me that's going to impact. It's also my kids, because not only the way I treat them, but even if I treat them better, the example that I'm setting for them is going to be impacted by how I treat myself. So thanks for the therapy.
You're welcome.
All right. So if people think you're fascinating and wonderful, how can they follow or support you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Rissa_Bubbles. There's a story behind that one. And I'm on Instagram.
You can tell it or no?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, I had two other friends, and we went as the Powerpuff Girls for Halloween. And I was blonde
awesome.
at the time, so I was Bubbles. And so then I was Rissa Bubbles for a long time.
All right. I love it. So it's just stuck.
It just stuck. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Sorry, you're saying Instagram.
Yeah. On Instagram, I'm duo, DUO_RNR. And I don't post on that a lot. I'm pretty bad with social media. I'm getting better at social media.
I like it.
Trying to use words. But the RNR is because I have a partner. We do acro together, and his name is Rooney. My name is Rissa. So we're duo RNR.
I love it. So would that be a good place people to look for, in addition to the links in the show notes, if somebody wants to check out your acro, that'd be a good place to look?
Oh, yes, definitely.
I love it. Well, this was freaking fantastic. I feel good about my life, and I know everyone else who listens to it well. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you bringing this hard-earned insight to bear for the rest of us, and so we can all learn from, like, the hard work that you've done.
Thank you so much. And if people have thoughts about it, they have new insight on all of these concepts, please let me know, because I'm constantly trying to learn more about this stuff.
I love it. Yeah, if this reminds any of you all of TED Talk or a book or anything like that, definitely tag both of us at Stop For Matt on Twitter and at Rissa_Bubbles on Twitter. We'd love to hear more about it. So, all right, until the next time, y'all, be good to each other.
Thank you.